The lights of the America's Got Talent stage burned brighter than anything Leah Amor Santos had ever seen in her life. The 17-year-old girl from Cebu City stood at the center of the vast stage, feeling the cool surface under her shoes and the warmth of thousands of eyes fixed on her. Her hand shook slightly as she held the microphone, not from fear alone, but from the gravity of what this moment meant. For her parents, for every Filipina dreamer who grew up believing that talent was a gift but opportunity was a miracle. She looked out at the massive audience, at the judges' panel glowing in front of her, and her breath caught in her throat for a second. She had imagined this moment since she was a child, singing on plastic chairs during barangay fiestas, balancing on makeshift stages made of hollow blocks and borrowed plywood. Behind the curtains, her mother Elena wiped her eyes, as if trying to hide the trembling in her chest. Her father Marcos stood beside her, his calloused hands clasped tightly together. He had driven the jeepney extra hours for months, so they could afford this trip to America. It wasn't just money they invested. It was faith, hunger, risk, exhaustion, and the silent sacrifices Filipino parents make without ever calling them sacrifices. Simon Cowell leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, studying the quiet girl with long black hair and honest eyes. "Tell us why you came all the way from the Philippines," he asked in his calm, controlled voice. Leah swallowed, feeling her heart hammering wildly. "I came because I want to give hope to my family," she said softly, "and because my father worked so hard for my dream. I want him to know it wasn't for nothing." The raw emotion in her voice rippled through the silent room. Even before she sang a note, the audience could sense something unspoken, a story carried not in words, but in the fragile strength of her voice. The music began, a slow and gentle piano line that felt like the beginning of a prayer whispered in the wind. Leah took her first breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and allowed everything inside her, fear, love, struggle, longing, to flow into the melody. When she opened her mouth, her voice was soft but steady, rich with warmth and vulnerability. She sang, "You raised me up," but not in the usual grand style. She sang it the way a daughter sings to a father, the way a dream speaks to the world when it finally finds the courage to be heard. Her voice soared gently, blending English with a few tender Visayan lines that seemed to float above the audience like delicate threads of memory. Every note carried her childhood moments, the nights without electricity but full of music, the mornings when her mother cooked porridge to make food last, the times she cried quietly after competition she couldn't afford to join. Yet here she was, standing on the biggest stage in the world, not as a girl who came from struggle, but as a girl who turned struggle into power. As she reached the high note, her voice grew stronger, fuller, filled with every unspoken dream she had guarded for years. People in the audience covered their mouths, stunned by the purity of her tone. Tears rolled down faces everywhere, strangers moved by a story they didn't need words to understand. Simon froze, his eyes locked on her, not judging but absorbing, realizing he was witnessing something rare, something deeply human. When the final note faded, a silence deeper than applause held the room for 1 second. Then the theater exploded, cheers, shouts, standing ovations, people crying as if released from something heavy. And Leah, overwhelmed, pressed her hand to her chest as her tears finally fell, knowing she had given everything she had to this single, shining moment. The applause from the audience seemed endless, rolling through the theater like a powerful wave that refused to settle. Leah stood frozen for a moment, trying to steady her breathing as she looked at the sea of people rising to their feet. Many were still wiping tears, some smiling in disbelief, and others clapping with a kind of urgency, as if they needed her to feel how deeply she had moved them. The lights above her glittered like stars, catching the gold shimmer that still lingered in the air from the reflections of the stage panels. Heidi was the first judge to find her voice. She pressed both hands over her heart as she leaned forward, eyes still glistening. "Leah, that was so beautiful," she whispered into her mic, almost too emotional to speak louder. Sophia nodded beside her, wiping the corner of her eye with a tissue. "You touched us," she said, her voice trembling. "Every word, every note, it felt like it was coming from your soul." Howie turned slightly in his seat, still applauding even as he spoke. "There's something about you," he said. "It's not just your voice, it's who you are. You made everyone in this room feel connected to your story. That is real talent." But the entire energy shifted when the camera cut to Simon. The audience quieted, sensing the weight of his reaction. Simon Cowell didn't speak right away. He was staring at Leah with a softness almost no one was used to seeing from him. His arms were loosely crossed, but his expression was open, unusually open. He inhaled as if composing himself before speaking. "Leah," he began slowly, "something happened here tonight." His voice wasn't sharp or analytical. It was gentle, steady, almost heavy with emotion. "I've judged thousands of singers. I know when someone is technically good, and I know when someone is unforgettable. What you did just now, it wasn't just singing. It was something deeper." Leah felt her knees weaken. She held the microphone with both hands, unsure whether to smile or cry. Simon continued, eyes never leaving hers. "I felt your truth. I felt your courage. And I felt how much this dream means to you and your family." He nodded slightly, almost as if he were honoring her. "That is what this show is about." Backstage, Marco and Elena clung to each other. Elena was sobbing softly into a handkerchief, while Marco tried, and failed, to blink back his tears. "Anik, you did it," he whispered to the TV monitor, his voice breaking. Leah took a small step back in disbelief as the judges continued praising her. Heidi called her magical. Sophia said she was one of the most emotionally transparent performers she had ever seen. Howie added that he hadn't felt that kind of sincerity on the AGT stage in a long time. The crowd kept roaring, some chanting her name. "Leah! Leah! Leah!" while others waved Filipino flags proudly from their seats. The moment felt surreal, like the world had rearranged itself around her. She wasn't just a girl from Cebu anymore. She was someone whose voice had reached across the room and straight into people's hearts. And yet the biggest moment was still coming. The energy in the room shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, as Simon slowly adjusted his chair and placed one hand over the golden buzzer. For a moment, everything on the AGT stage seemed to exist in slow motion. The roar of the crowd softened into a distant hum, the lights dimmed just enough to make the golden button on Simon's desk glow like a tiny rising sun, and Leah felt her heartbeat thundering louder than the cheers surrounding her. She stared at Simon, unsure if she was imagining the way his hand hovered near the golden buzzer, the object every performer dreamed of but never dared expect. The judges' table felt like the center of the universe, and every eye in the theater was fixed on Simon's next move. Simon leaned forward again, but this time his voice was even softer, warmer than before. "Leah," he said, and her name sounded almost like a promise on his tongue. What you brought tonight wasn't just talent. It was heart. Real heart. You reminded us why we fell in love with this show, because every now and then someone walks onto this stage and makes the whole world stop. Leah's breath caught. She clutched the microphone so tightly her fingers trembled. The audience grew restless with anticipation. Whispers rose like electricity in the air, some people shouting, "Do it, Simon!" Others already covering their mouths as tears returned. Backstage, Elena gripped Marco's arm as if grounding herself, and Marco whispered, "Please, please," under his breath, almost like a prayer. Simon took one last long look at Leah. His eyes shimmered with sincerity rarely seen on camera. "You came all the way from Cebu," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You carried your family's hope. And tonight, you gave us something unforgettable." Then he stood up. The entire room erupted as he placed both hands on the golden buzzer and slammed it with force. Immediately, the iconic sound blasted through the arena, a bright, ringing strike that echoed like a celebration across the world. Gold confetti burst from the ceiling in massive waves, falling like glittering rain over Leah as she gasped, her knees buckling. She covered her mouth with her hands as tears streamed down her face, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. Her parents ran onto the stage, both crying uncontrollably. Elena wrapped her arms around her daughter, her shoulders shaking with joy. Marco placed his hands on Leah's cheeks, whispering, "Anik, you did it! You made us so proud!" his voice breaking in every syllable. Leah tried to speak, but no sound came out. She simply cried into her parents' embrace as the golden confetti continued to fall, sticking to her hair and eyelashes, shining under the stage lights like tiny blessings from above. The audience was screaming, cheering, some jumping, some hugging strangers. Filipino flags waved in the crowd as fans shouted in celebration. Simon watched the entire scene with a gentle smile, one hand resting over his heart as if moved more deeply than he expected. The judges stood around him, clapping and wiping tears, completely swept up in the magic of the moment. As the confetti settled and the music swelled, Leah looked up through her tears at the glowing AGT sign above her. She realized that in one moment, one song, she had transformed not just her future, but her family's entire story. She had come from Cebu with a dream. And now, standing under a shower of gold, she felt that dream becoming real.